There are moments in American politics that seem impossible to imagine, until they happen. For more than 3 decades, Lindsey Graham was one of the most recognizable voices in Washington. Whether people agreed with him or strongly opposed him, few questioned his influence. He had become a fixture in the United States Senate, a familiar face on television, and one of the Republican Party's most outspoken advocates on national security and foreign policy. Then, without warning, that voice fell silent. On the evening of July 11, 2026, Senator Lindsey Graham died after what his office described as a brief and sudden illness. He was 71 years old, having celebrated his birthday only 2 days earlier. Preliminary findings from the District of Columbia medical examiner later concluded that he died from an aortic dissection caused by arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease, a tear in the body's main artery linked to long-term hardening of the arteries. Emergency responders were called to his Washington, D.C. home, but despite their efforts, he could not be saved. The announcement spread across America within minutes. Television networks interrupted their regular programming. News alerts appeared on millions of phones. Political commentators who had debated Graham for years suddenly found themselves reflecting on a career that had shaped generations of policy discussions. Tributes arrived from both allies and longtime critics. President Donald Trump called Graham one of the greatest people and senators he had ever known and ordered American flags flown at half-staff in his honor. Leaders from both political parties acknowledged his decades of public service, while international figures, including leaders from countries Graham had strongly supported throughout his career, shared messages of respect and sympathy. Across South Carolina, residents gathered outside government buildings, churches, and community landmarks. Flowers appeared beneath American flags. Some remembered the senator who never forgot his home state. Others reflected on his willingness to engage in difficult debates, even when controversy followed. For many Americans, Lindsey Graham represented a generation of lawmakers whose careers stretched across multiple presidencies, wars, economic crises, and dramatic political shifts. His passing felt like the closing of another chapter in modern American politics. In this video, we'll take you through Lindsey Graham's remarkable life, the events surrounding his passing, the emotional funeral attended by family, friends, and political leaders, and finally the deeply personal tribute from his sister, Darlene Graham. Those who were there said her words revealed a side of Lindsey that few Americans had ever seen. Stay with us until the very end to understand why her farewell became the most unforgettable moment of the service. But to understand why so many paused to remember him, it helps to look back at where his story began. Lindsey Olin Graham's childhood was far removed from the marble halls of the Capitol. His parents, Florence and Millie Graham, owned a small restaurant and bar known as the Sanitary Cafe. Like many family businesses, everyone worked. Lindsey learned responsibility early, washing dishes, waiting tables, and helping however he could. Life changed dramatically while he was still a teenager. Within roughly 15 months, both of his parents died, his mother from lymphoma and his father from a heart attack. Suddenly, Lindsey and his younger sister, Darlene, found themselves facing unimaginable loss. Rather than walking away from responsibility, Lindsey stepped forward. While continuing his education, he became the primary source of stability for his younger sister, helping ensure they stayed together during one of the most difficult periods of their lives. Friends would later say those years shaped everything that followed. Duty came before comfort. Responsibility came before ambition. After graduating from the University of South Carolina's law school, Graham joined the United States Air Force as a Judge Advocate General Officer. His legal career in uniform eventually included service in the Air Force Reserve and Air National Guard, with deployments connected to Operation Desert Storm as well as later overseas assignments. Military service became a defining part of his identity and strongly influenced his views on national defense throughout his political career. Politics soon followed. In 1994, Graham won election to the U.S. House of Representatives. 8 years later, he captured the Senate seat previously held by Strom Thurmond, beginning what would become more than 2 decades in the United States Senate. Over time, Graham built a reputation as one of Congress's leading voices on military affairs, judicial nominations, and international security. Supporters admired his willingness to defend America's alliances and advocate for a strong national defense. Critics often challenged his positions, particularly on foreign policy. Yet few questioned that he had become one of the Senate's most influential Republicans. Perhaps no political relationship defined him more than his friendship with Senator John McCain. The two became nearly inseparable on issues involving defense and foreign affairs. They traveled together, debated together, and developed a friendship that extended well beyond politics. After McCain's death in 2018, many observers noticed a change in Graham. The senator who had long relied on his closest friend was now navigating Washington without him. Another relationship would come to define the next chapter of his career. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Graham sharply criticized Donald Trump. But over the following years, the two developed a close political alliance. Graham became one of Trump's most dependable supporters in the Senate, helping advance judicial confirmations, defending key administration policies, and remaining one of the president's most visible congressional allies. Their evolving relationship became one of the most discussed political transformations of the era. Whether viewed as a principled conservative, a skilled political strategist, or a deeply polarizing figure, Lindsey Graham left a lasting mark on American politics. Now, as preparations began for his final farewell, attention shifted from the Senate chamber to a place of quiet reflection. The nation was preparing to say goodbye, not through speeches on the Senate floor, but at a funeral where family, friends, military colleagues, and political leaders would gather to honor a life spent in public service. By the time the morning of Lindsey Graham's funeral arrived, the sense of loss had settled across South Carolina. For decades, he had represented the state in Washington. Now, people from every walk of life had gathered for one final farewell, not to debate his politics, but to honor a life devoted to public service, military duty, and family. The funeral service was held in his home state, where Lindsey had spent nearly his entire life before entering national politics. Long before the doors opened, mourners quietly lined the sidewalks outside the church. American flags rested beside flower arrangements in shades of white, blue, and soft yellow. Military personnel stood at attention while church volunteers welcomed guests in respectful silence. Inside, the sanctuary reflected the simplicity Lindsey Graham had often said he admired. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, filling the room with a warm glow. Rows of white lilies, roses, and seasonal flowers surrounded the front of the church, while large American flags stood on either side of the casket. At its center rested a polished wooden casket draped with the stars and stripes, a reminder of both his years in the Senate and his service as an Air Force officer. The quiet inside the sanctuary spoke louder than words. There was no rush, no loud conversations, only whispered greetings, gentle embraces, and long moments of reflection. As the organ began playing traditional hymns, family members slowly made their way to the front of the church. Among them was Lindsey's younger sister, Darlene Graham, accompanied by relatives and close family friends. Though away from the public spotlight for most of her life, she remained the person who had shared Lindsey's earliest memories, his greatest hardships, and the journey that shaped them both after the loss of their parents. Soon afterward, military officers entered in ceremonial dress uniform. The honor guard moved with practiced precision as veterans in attendance quietly stood in respect. For many, it was a fitting tribute to a man who had worn the uniform himself before ever stepping into elected office. Outside, additional guests continued arriving. Current and former members of Congress greeted one another with solemn expressions. Governors, state officials, judges, military leaders, and longtime staff members quietly found their seats. Then came several of the nation's most recognizable political figures. President Donald Trump arrived alongside members of his administration, pausing briefly to greet Lindsey's family before taking his seat near the front. Former Senate colleagues from both parties followed, setting aside years of political disagreements to pay their respects. The atmosphere reflected something often seen only during moments of profound loss. Political division seemed smaller than the shared recognition that one of Washington's longest-serving voices was gone. As the service began, a pastor welcomed those gathered and spoke about Lindsey's lifelong commitment to faith, responsibility, and perseverance. He reminded the congregation that before Lindsey Graham became a senator, before television interviews and Senate hearings, he was simply a young man from central South Carolina, who learned responsibility much earlier than most. The pastor reflected on the tragedy that forever changed Lindsey's life, the deaths of both parents while he and Darlene were still young. Instead of allowing grief to define him, Lindsey accepted responsibilities many adults would have struggled to carry. Those early sacrifices, the pastor said, revealed the same character that later defined his public service. Following the opening prayer, a military ensemble performed "America the Beautiful," filling the sanctuary with a quiet dignity that seemed to unite everyone in attendance. Some guests lowered their heads. Others quietly wiped away tears. The music faded into silence before several of Lindsey's longtime colleagues stepped forward to share memories. One recalled the senator's relentless work ethic, describing how Graham would often be the first to arrive for committee meetings and the last to leave after difficult negotiations. Another remembered his unmistakable sense of humor. Even during tense debates, Lindsey had a way of breaking the silence with a quick remark that reminded everyone there was still room for humanity. A former Senate staff member shared a different side of him. Away from television cameras, Graham regularly checked on staff members' families, remembered birthdays, and quietly offered encouragement during difficult times. Many of those gestures were never made public. That was simply the way he preferred it. Several speakers reflected on his friendship with Senator John McCain. They spoke of countless overseas trips, long policy discussions, and the deep personal bond the two men shared. One colleague admitted that after McCain's passing, Lindsey carried a quiet sadness that only those closest to him fully understood. Another speaker turned the congregation's attention back to South Carolina. He described Lindsey as someone who never stopped introducing himself as a kid from Central, regardless of how many years he spent inside the Capitol. That connection to home, he said, never faded. Throughout the service, moments of silence often spoke louder than the speeches themselves. The sound of pages turning in hymn books, the soft footsteps of the honor guard, the quiet sniffles echoing through the pews. Every detail reminded those gathered that they were witnessing the conclusion of a life lived in service to his country, his state, and the family that had shaped him long before politics ever did. As the service neared its final moments, military personnel quietly moved into position for the honors that would follow outside the church. The congregation sensed that one final farewell remained. Then, just as the sanctuary fell completely silent, every eye slowly turned toward the front. Lindsey's sister, Darlene Graham, gently rose from her seat. She held a folded piece of paper in her hands. The room became so still that even the faint rustle of the pages could be heard. Everyone waited to hear the words of the person who had known Lindsey Graham not as a senator, not as a public figure, but simply as a brother. For those gathered inside the church, this would become the moment they remembered most. People close to the Graham family later shared that Darlene Graham spoke privately and emotionally during the funeral service. Darlene stood quietly for a few moments before beginning. She looked toward the flag-draped casket, then slowly across the congregation filled with family, friends, military veterans, and colleagues who had known her brother in so many different ways. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, though emotion could be heard beneath every word. To the country, he was Senator Lindsey Graham. To me, he was the person who never let me feel alone. The church remained perfectly still. She spoke not about politics, campaigns, or headlines. Instead, she spoke about two children whose lives changed forever. People often ask where Lindsey found his strength. I think it began long before Washington. It began when we lost our parents. Many in the room already knew the story. Within a short period, Lindsey and Darlene had lost both their mother and father while they were still young. It was a tragedy that could have pulled a family apart. Instead, it brought a brother and sister even closer. After we lost so much, he became my strength long before he became America's senator. Several guests quietly lowered their heads. Darlene smiled gently through her tears as she recalled those early years in South Carolina. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He simply believed that family comes first. That's the way our parents raised us. She remembered the small moments, working long hours, making sure responsibilities were handled, encouraging her whenever life seemed uncertain. Those memories never appeared in newspaper stories. They never became campaign speeches. Yet to her, they revealed the man behind the public office. Many people knew the leader. I was blessed to know the brother. A quiet sniffle echoed through the sanctuary. In the front pew, relatives reached for one another's hands. Darlene continued by reflecting on the life millions of Americans had watched from a distance. She acknowledged that public service brought both praise and criticism. Her brother understood that better than anyone. Not everyone agreed with Lindsey. He knew that. He accepted it. But every morning he woke up believing he had a responsibility to serve this country the best way he knew how. She paused before adding another thought. When the cameras turned off, politics stayed outside our conversations more often than people might imagine. We talked about family. We remembered our parents. We laughed about old stories from Central. Those were the moments I treasured most. Several of Lindsey's longtime Senate colleagues quietly nodded. They had seen that side of him too, the side that rarely made the evening news. Darlene's voice softened. Some of the greatest things he ever did were never recorded by cameras. The sentence lingered in the silence. She described simple acts of kindness. Phone calls to friends going through difficult times. Checking on former staff members. Quietly helping others without asking for recognition. The audience listened without interruption. No one seemed interested in politics anymore. Only the life behind the office. She then turned her attention to the place her brother always called home. No matter where he traveled, South Carolina was never far from his heart. He carried it with him every day. For a brief moment, she looked toward the veterans seated together inside the church. He was proud to wear his country's uniform. He was proud to represent his state. But more than anything, he was proud of the people who believed in him. A few veterans slowly raised their hands in salute. Others simply bowed their heads. The sanctuary had become completely silent once again. Darlene drew a slow breath before speaking what many would later describe as the most moving words of the service. "I know the world will remember the senator." She looked toward the casket. "I'll remember my big brother." There were no dramatic gestures. No lengthy pause. Only quiet honesty. Tears began appearing throughout the congregation. Family members gently embraced. Friends who had spent decades beside Lindsey Graham wiped their eyes. Several former staff members stared toward the floor, overcome with emotion. Even those accustomed to public ceremonies found themselves struggling to remain composed. As Darlene returned to her seat, the pastor offered a final prayer of gratitude for a life of service, for a family that endured unimaginable loss, and for the hope that love leaves behind even after death. Outside the church, members of the Military Honor Guard prepared for Lindsey Graham's final honors. The casket was carried with measured precision. Each step reflected discipline. Each movement reflected respect. The Honor Guard presented arms. Then came the sound that has accompanied the farewell of countless American service members. 3 rifle volleys echoed across the grounds. The mournful notes of taps followed, drifting through the quiet afternoon air. Many in attendance stood motionless. Some closed their eyes. Others held tightly to loved ones standing beside them. When the music ended, 2 service members carefully folded the American flag that had rested over the casket into the traditional triangle. With deliberate care, it was presented to Lindsey Graham's family as a symbol of gratitude for his military service and lifelong commitment to his country. No words were needed. The gesture alone carried profound meaning. As guests slowly departed, conversations centered not on legislation or political battles, but on character, on resilience, on loyalty, on the remarkable journey of a young man from central South Carolina who endured heartbreaking loss, served in uniform, rose to the United States Senate, and never forgot the family that shaped him. History will continue to debate Lindsey Graham's decisions, his policies, and his place in American politics. That is the nature of public life. But beyond every speech, every vote, and every headline was a brother who stood beside his sister when life demanded courage, a son who carried the values of his parents throughout his life, and a public servant who believed deeply in duty. In the end, perhaps the most enduring tribute was not delivered from the Senate floor or written in history books. It was found in the quiet words of a sister remembering the brother who never let her face life's hardest moments alone. And for those fortunate enough to witness that final farewell, it became a reminder that titles eventually fade, public debates come to an end, but love, sacrifice, and family remain the legacy people carry in their hearts long after the final goodbye.